Paul Farmer, physician, a globe-trotting doctor who divides his time between Haiti and Harvard. He's one of the founders of Partners in Health, which works with local communities delivering comprehensive healthcare in less developed countries. He's a professor of medical anthropology at Harvard. In this conversation, Farmer, a noted writer, speaker, and activist, discusses the inequalities of the world and the obligation to combat the dual epidemics of poverty and disease. Question. In your fight against the almost overwhelming crisis of HIV and AIDS and the global inequities in healthcare, do you ever reach a point when you decide you have done a good job or done enough, even if you haven't reached your utopian destination? If you never do reach that point when you feel you have made enough progress, how do you keep momentum and energy and idealism alive? Paul Farmer. You said almost overwhelming. I would just go ahead and say overwhelming. Who said I am not overwhelmed? I find it completely overwhelming. People constantly ask us, how are you keeping the work going in Haiti? Especially now, just a few days after the overthrow of democratically elected President John Bertrand Aristide. Our work has not stopped, and it will not stop, because we work with Haitians living in their home villages, as well as with Haitian health professionals. The work cannot stop. In other words, I am working with a community of people and not solo by any stretch of the imagination. When one of us feels overwhelmed, there are others on the team who might not feel overwhelmed. My colleagues and I remind each other, if they, the people we are serving, and who are living with these awful conditions, and I am not only talking about diseases, but also about having to worry about feeding your kids or getting clean water, if they do not despair, then how can we arrogate despair for ourselves? How can we say that we are going to allow ourselves to be despairing or hopeless? This just may be an effective strategy for keeping sane. Be connected to others who are not overwhelmed at the same time that you are, and realize that the people you serve are not allowing themselves to be overwhelmed and despairing. Those are two important parts of the answer to your question. A third antidote to despair for me would be the things I like about being a clinician, whether as a doctor, nurse, social worker, or another person providing direct services. In our work, even when you're losing the battle on the grand scale, you can still have small victories with individual patients or their families. In my line of work, which is infectious diseases, most people do get better. For a person in rural Haiti living in horrible poverty and with AIDS, if you treat her correctly by getting her on the medications she needs and providing her with the necessary social support, she will actually get better, even though the conditions around her might not improve anytime soon. We all want big victories that we can point to as adding up to something, as changing the world. Everybody wants that. But even when you cannot convince yourself that your work is meaningful on that scale, there are still small victories. Now, that might sound a little bit craven, as though I'm saying, quote, well, if the definition of success is too daunting, just ratchet down the definition of success, end quote. I am not saying that. I am saying it is important to be mindful of the need for large victories and to not feel overwhelmed. But it is also important to be mindful of the fact that the small victories are important too. Sometimes they're all you're going to get. Question. In your interview with Caleb Hellerman, you stated that the average cost of HIV treatment in the US would be in the range of $10,000 per patient annually, compared to $1,500 annually for those who are treated by your organization in Haiti. How have you been able to work with drug companies? Have you succeeded in obtaining price cuts despite the fact that it hurts their high profitability and bottom line? Paul Farmer. I have some updates for you from the time that interview was conducted, and most of the news is good. First, however, I should point out that the $10,000 I cited, the lowball US estimate, is probably the cost of the medications alone. I do not think that the estimate includes lab work, physician and nurse costs, and certainly not hospitalization. As for the second figure, it now costs around $150 per patient per year for a good 3-drug combination, reduced dramatically from $1,440, which was a concession price from the research-based pharmaceutical industry. To answer the first part of your question, how have we done it? We did it through coalition building. We did it by working with the World Health Organization, Doctors Without Borders, and a group called the International Dispensary Association. There are also other players now on the scene. The second part of the question is the really hard part. The research-based pharmaceutical companies can reasonably argue, I suppose, that they have to be profitable or their stockholders will not be satisfied. I am not an investor, but I can understand their point of view. However, I would say in honesty that the profitability of the drug companies is not my concern. My concern is for the welfare of my patients. I am not saying that to irritate. I think there's a mutual respect between doctors and people involved in the research-based pharmaceutical industry. So it does not seem unreasonable for someone who is a physician to not concern him or himself with the profitability of pharmaceuticals, but rather with the welfare of the patients at hand. That said, let me review my response. 1. We have continued to drop the price of antiretroviral therapy to around $150 per patient per year. 2. Coalition building is how we did it. 3. The profitability issue is not my primary concern. The question of funding is a real dilemma and I do not know the answer. We have to find a way to finance drug development for the diseases of the poor. There must be a way, perhaps through a mix of public and private resources. After all, the everyday cash flows of the international financial markets are unthinkably huge. There are also enormous cash flows in the public sector and in the international financial institutions such as the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Those are not private cash flows. Those organizations are publicly funded by member states and ultimately by citizens. Furthermore, I think most of you already know that the research-based pharmaceutical industry is the most profitable of all international commerce, year in and year out. It has the highest return on investment, and it spends more on advertising than it does on research and development. Where do I get this information? From left-wing conspiracy magazines like Fortune. You get this information right from their own literature. Those facts are important to have in the debate, but we also have to acknowledge that the research-based pharmaceutical companies are under great pressure to produce high returns for their investors. We are not going to alter the structure of the modern corporation in time to develop new meds for diseases that afflict the poor. We have to create novel funding strategies. Question. It seems that you have chosen to balance your life more in favor of the good works you do than your family or other things that might bring you more personal happiness. Do you ever regret the little time that your chosen path leaves for friends and family? Paul Farmer. Most of my friends and family are involved in the same work I do. If I told you what my daughter said to me yesterday about the current situation in Haiti, you would never believe it. She said that she wanted to go to a demonstration. Now, if she says something like this to people who are not deeply involved in this line of work, they're going to think we are brainwashing the kid. She's only 6. But she did say it. I did not tell her to say it. It is true. You cannot make this stuff up. It is really a different issue for me. The natural affiliation of my own friends and family and associates is really around the work we all do. Everybody needs escape to life's simple pleasures, laughter and forgetting and so on. But sometimes, laughter and forgetting come at a pretty high price psychically because the world is so riven by the problems that you are considering in this class. The striking thing about the world to me is its inequalities. 50 years after the development of effective treatment, tuberculosis was still the leading infectious killer of adults in the world until it was surpassed by HIV disease. That is crazy. People die of diseases for which there are vaccines that cost 12 cents. The question of making meaning in difficult times, everybody grapples with that. I am certainly not satisfied or self-satisfied. I keep asking myself, am I doing enough? Are we doing enough? But rarely do I ask, is this meaningful at all? For me, what I do is the most compelling thing I could be doing. Question. You have said that as members of the community, we must recognize that we can and should summon our collective resources to save the countless lives that were previously alleged to be beyond our help. How can the average citizen go about summoning the resources to further your cause? Paul Farmer. For me, as a teacher of medical students, as a doctor, and as an anthropologist, I think that it is probably not a good idea for me to be prescriptive and say you should do it this way rather than that way. In my experience, one of the things that people need to do is figure out what appeals to them personally. If you're going to devote time to good works when you already have plenty of other things to do, then you have to like what you're doing. It has to be appealing to you because of another condition of modernity, the impression that there is not enough time. I feel that terribly, the time pinch. When I get involved in things that I consider to be compelling issues, it has to be something that I do not dislike doing, and I hope that that is not too Acadian. For example, I could not be a full-time policy maker working in a think tank. I just would not be good at it. I have to be around patients, but other people love that sort of thing and are good at it, and we need those people. Maybe the last thing that you expected me to say is, it depends on your personality. The hard part is figuring out what you like to do and how you can remain engaged over time.